It doesn't actually, for what it's worth. No, I do want you to know that is like the major focus of my work because that's where, I'm an expert witness and a legal consultant, and the fiber and grain industries don't necessarily have money to pay me. The extract industries have money to pay me. So that's my focus there. No, these variables, they don't have anything. The FDA, there's variables in every botanical extract, my love.
Right.
Now, granted, we're very complex, right? There's not another plant that has 140 cannabinoids and growing. I mean, for sure.
Hey guys, it's Mandy with Global Hemp Association. I wanted to say thank you so much for joining. I'm excited about the opportunity to build a relationship and connect this supply chain. I mean, after all, that's why we started the association. Our association was built on the foundation of connecting supply chain, building relationships, and helping you grow your business. Anyone from farmers, manufacturers, and distributors, people that are passionate about the supply chain, and those creating products selling into biofuels, plastics, textiles, construction, and building materials.
And we're live. Do. We need to get some new commercials. I love those little things.
They're great. Those are great, Miss Mandy.
Well, hello, and welcome everybody. Thank you very much for joining. I know that Elena is getting ready to send a text message out to all of our members here in just a minute, and so I'm really excited to see people log in. And as you do, please drop us a note and let us know where you're logging in from. And if you have any questions, Joy has an incredible background and more knowledge than most about this topic. And so please don't hesitate to ask questions or connect with her. Just a reminder, please log in or switch to your YouTube. If you're not on our YouTube channel, make sure that you subscribe. We're really close to being able to monetize and open up some new privileges or opportunities through YouTube. And so we would love your support there. Anyways, Joy, thank you for joining me today. I'm excited to have you.
Such a pleasure.
And instead of me just rambling on, I would love to turn it over to you and hear a little bit about your background and what got you into what you're doing now.
There's hemp can save the world. It's the pathway, I believe, to environmental stability and to a sustainable and regenerative world that so many of us have a vision for. I've been involved in hemp for a little over 30 years. I was bit by the hemp bug at the age of 20 in 1990. Boy, am I dating myself. At a Grateful Dead show in Foxborough, Massachusetts. I had received a flyer that had excerpts from basically the Bible of the hemp movement and cannabis movements, The Emperor Wears No Clothes, written by Jack Herer and edited by Chris Conrad. And I had basically at the time, as a 20-year-old girl, thought, well, we're definitely going to kill the world and ourselves, but on our way to that, inevitable demise, we should celebrate peace, love, and music. And so when I read this flyer, there was this sort of convergence that occurred inside of me between a sense of justice and that I had been raised with. I was raised by my father, who is an attorney and raised me by himself, and a sense of planetary healing where I read these words, and I certainly don't believe everything I say, but this affected me on a cellular level. And I said, wait a second, there's actually a way out of this inevitable demise, and they've criminalized it. They've made it illegal. And so that convergence really just lit a fire and altered the trajectory of my life. I ended up owning the first post-prohibition hemp store in the state of New York in the early 90s in Woodstock. And then when that inaugural hemp bill passed in Vermont in 1996, which was to study hemp, not to grow it, the Vermont Hemp Council formed, and I was appointed to serve as secretary of the Vermont Hemp Council. So relocated my then very young sons to Burlington, Vermont to serve in that position and to run 3 additional hemp stores in Vermont. And then also when medical marijuana was legalized in Seattle, in Washington state in the late 90s, my children were also getting a little older. I was a single mother and I needed more opportunity and more income to provide them with the quality of life. And so relocated then to Washington state, where I also continued my paralegal career. I started to become in legal support in Vermont. I went to school for legal support and was an English major. And then ultimately formed Hemp Ace International in 2014 after serving as senior paralegal to some very high-end firms here in Washington for 20 years. My sons are now adults. And Hemp Ace International is an expert witness legal support and consulting firm that serves really the global hemp industries. Law and policy and education on hemp are really my calling and my expertise, as it turns out, in the hemp sector.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about where the hemp industry is right now. You get to look at it from a little bit of a different angle than those that are, hands in the dirt. So talk to me a little bit about, what does it look like on a big scale, global scale?
Yeah, no, and I own part owner of several companies, and so my hand is, in the proverbial dirt quite a bit. But yes, from this eagle eye view, we're watching asteroids hitting meteors as the crop reestablishes itself now that it is an agricultural commodity and has reclaimed its place in the broad light of day among America's other agricultural commodities. Now, as you know, Canada, of course, federally legalized the crop in 1998. So, and then very quickly established itself as the global leader in hemp grain, bulk food ingredients. And we'll see if they can keep that position. And then Europe, of course, has quite a leg up on us in terms of fiber processing and other things. And then, of course, China has had the lead on everybody with textiles, particularly. They, in China, figured out how to delineate or degum hemp fiber, I think in the late 1980s. And we can now, of course, make just thousands of different hemp textile blends. America is learning very valuable lessons. Of course, we had that massive overproduction of hemp extract varieties and learned that it takes, just a little bit of hemp to make a whole lot of hemp distillate. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but we obviously overproduced by a couple 100,000 acres, I think, at one point. And so farmers and the industry are learning their lessons there. That, of course, is a huge bit, and I'm sure we'll address it later in the show, Miss Mandy, with the FDA continuing to shirk its responsibilities and refuse to do its job by creating a regulatory framework, particularly for cannabidiol, which has been proven now 10 million times over to be safe and not cause liver toxicity like by the way, many other legal dietary supplements and over-the-counter drugs that kill people every year. So we're learning some valuable lessons, but for the most part, and you are so acutely aware of this, Mandy, is we've had to put one foot in front of the other, right? Ever since 2014, with the 2014 Farm Bill that legalized hemp in states that permitted the cultivation of it for research purposes or agricultural pilot programs. And then, of course, the 2018 Farm Bill that said, hey, we're beyond research now, you are an agricultural commodity. But we've been asking farmers to grow a crop for which there's very little infrastructure. If we talk about processing the longest, strongest stock in the world, or that nutrient dense grain or seed. And then, of course, the botanical extraction, which that infrastructure clearly was rampant throughout the United States. But asking farmers to grow a crop for which there's very little infrastructure, and then asking entrepreneurs and investors to invest in infrastructure for which there is very little crop to feed those machines, right? So, but we're working in tandem, putting one foot in front of the other, and we're watching that infrastructure to process the fiber, the stock, and to process the grain come online. And that's what we're seeing is ultimately we need to see those processing facilities within 50 to 100 square miles of every hemp biomass feedstock. And we're nowhere near that yet, but this is what it looks like. We are building the infrastructure, and we are absolutely going to deliver on the promise of hemp, not just in the United States, but all around the world.
For sure. Okay, so you said lots of things I want to go back to. That was like a perfect recap of what I want to talk about.
Yay!
So you mentioned that Europe's really far ahead, right? And they have been. And there's a couple of things that I've heard over this last little bit is the scarcity of land that's being used in China for food versus fiber, has really shifted production of fiber, even to import from Europe potentially for textiles. And then on Europe, how long do you think before the US catches up or surpasses Europe's technology and or acreage that is used for our seed, or a lot of our seed, purchase. So yeah, I'm curious from you.
Yeah, well, major difference between as Europe and China, as everybody knows, I'm stating the obvious, is of course that there's a lot less land in Europe and a lot more land in China. So, so I'll take it by ag land, one piece of that, and then technology, the other. And
Yes.
oh boy, I do not want to put my cowgirl hat on here and wave my flag, but it's happening. My cowgirl hat's on, I'm waving my flag. And I will say that, I challenge any country in the United States to come up against the United States when we are galvanized, when we are inspired, and when necessity, which is the mother invention, kicks in, and it has kicked in. I also, of course, and cooperation is everything. So it's all of us countries working together and getting into sort of an economic permaculture and corporate permaculture and entrepreneurial permaculture, as it were. That will solve this thing. But, we all make different types of decisions based on different priorities and considerations, and now here I'll put my European hat on and say, man, does the United States have a lot to learn from Europe in terms of priorities and making wiser decisions. But I think that China, has some interesting priorities in terms of putting its people first versus profits. And so I don't know what to say about food security in China. And I hadn't heard that they were using more of their land for fiber than agriculture. That's alarming to me. So I'm happy to claim ignorance on that.
Well, and it's been through rumor from people in the textile industry have told us that their fiber is now being imported right over in China from Europe because their land is being used to grow food instead of fiber.
Oh, I had gotten the opposite. Thank you so much for distinguishing that and clarifying that, because I had gotten the opposite. That's great. That's putting people before profits. And now we're going to get to the supply chain piece of it. Thank you so much for that. So the reality is that both England and the United States have never, even when hemp was fully legal, we have never produced as much hemp as we required. We've always imported it, these two countries, and the United States is currently, and has been for decades, the largest importer of raw hemp materials and processed goods. Of course, this was even prior to legalization, because there has never been anything illegal about raw hemp materials and manufactured goods. It was simply the resin therefrom. It was resins only. Everything else about hemp. Oh, and seeds capable of germination. Obviously, they need to be sterilized, but we've always been trading, and we've always been the number one importer, just giving away, to our competition, all of those opportunities, particularly China. Now, I do believe, my sister, that we are going to turn into an exporter. Now, Europe is a little bit ahead of us as well. I mean, there's some very fine hemp linens, everything from Italy, Hungary, Russia. They've all been very big producers, even historically, and for hemp textiles. Not Italy as much, but they have a lot of, in terms of big producers, but they had a lot of experience with it, very fine hemp linens. So that doesn't surprise me at all. But again, Europe doesn't have very many. It's not very big. There's only they're very good with their ag lands, because they have to treat that soil and those lands very wisely due to their limited nature of them. Whereas here in the United States, my sister, we got lots of land. Hundreds and hundreds of millions of acres. And I do believe that we will become exporters. Not only will we be able to meet our demands, and there will, again, with permaculture, economic permaculture, we still will be importing, but we're going to be able to supply other countries. Absolutely. And create that economic stability for the farmer while we're creating environmental stability for the whole planet and everything that lives in it.
Okay, so there's been a lot of this gray area, right? Because of the resins and because of where the plant's coming from, right? And it's caused, I've heard it multiple times, Joe has always said, that CBD has hijacked the hemp industry, right? And so there's this big gray area. Can we talk a little bit, especially with your experience, around these new policies and proposals around total THC and what that means for our industry?
Absolutely. So
and I just want to say, this is a topic that for me, we're seeing our own industry battle, right? And it's where collaboration, so understanding what this means, I think is so valuable, like you said before we went live. So
thank you, Miss Mandy, for bringing this up. It's obviously very, very important. So, and I will try to be brief and not get lost in the weeds because it is oh so complex, but boiling it down the best I can. So the 2014 Farm Bill, which actually created a definition for industrial hemp for the first time in U.S. history, and it distinguished itself from other forms of cannabis in creating that definition. And it was a very simple definition. It said it's the industrial hemp means the plant Cannabis sativa L, and any part of such plant, whether growing or not, that does not contain greater than 0.3% delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol. Okay, it was very simple. Any part of the plant. If you took a hemp plant and you gave it to a 4-year-old and said, hey, you can play with any part of this plant, the 4-year-old, and then said, what part of that plant can't you play with? The 4-year-old would have said, I can play with the whole thing. You just said I can play with any part. And I would say, you are absolutely correct, 4-year-old. You can play with any part. But if I took that same hemp plant and gave it to the DEA under the 2014 Farm Bill and said, hey, DEA, you can play with any part of this plant. What part of that plant can't you play with? They would say, well, the flowering tops and the leaves and resins, of course. And you'd be like, what? We ended up the industry had to take the DEA to court because the DEA, and then they literally said, oh, they were sort of like patting the U.S. Congress, including then Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who had sort of shepherded this on the head and said, well, we appreciate what you think your intent was, but you don't know what you're talking about. Any part is really dangerous, man. That would include the flowering tops and the leaves and the resins. And we say no. So the executive branch and the legislative branch started fighting with each other, and we had to bring the judicial branch in. But while all of that fighting was going on, the 2018 Farm Bill was being drafted, and a new definition for hemp was being crafted to make it very clear to the DEA what any part means. And so now the word hemp as defined, we dropped industrial, thank God, that had been a good shield for us for years, but we don't need that word anymore. So hemp was defined now to expand the definition to make it very clear to the DEA that hemp means the plant Cannabis sativa L, and any part thereof, including its extracts, cannabinoids, derivatives, isomers, salts of isomers, compounds, the whole bit, whether growing or not, that does not contain greater than 0.3% delta-9 THC. So in creating that definition, which was very important for us to create, what happens and what often happens with law is science and the free market start to catch up with this new law. And don't you know that while it was everyone's intent, the Congress, congressional intent, all of the states that have legalized it, and those of us, the responsible members of the hemp industry, the intent was that these would be non-intoxicating cannabinoids, extracts, derivatives, etc. As it turns out, give people enough time to figure out how to make people high, and they will figure it out. So the thing is that also we were talking more about cannabinoids that are naturally found in the plant. And so while there is some synthesis that can go on, we can convert cannabinoids from one to another. Folks figured out that you could convert through a synthesis. You could convert non-intoxicating cannabinoids such as CBD into intoxicating cannabinoids. And to not belabor this point and make the entire show about this subject, I'll say, for example, delta-8 tetrahydrocannabinol, which is very similar to delta-9 and has intoxicating, psychoactive, and psychotropic effects. Now, all of that overproduction that we discussed of the CBD, we still in this country have, 55-gallon drums littered across this country from hemp extract from the 2019 and 2020 harvest. Well, people wanted to make money on that. So they took that CBD, converted it to delta-8 and other intoxicating cannabinoids. I want to make sure we're aware, though, that delta-8 THC, it only expresses itself in the hemp plant in infinitesimal amounts naturally, a little less than 1%. You would have to grow hundreds and thousands of acres in order to get commercially viable amounts of Delta 8 naturally occurring out of the plant. So this is a chemical synthesis that folks are doing. Now,
Converting.
Yes,
I have a THC shirt on right now, and I wish I could show you, because you could like see where the
double carbon bonds
this
are.
one just moves.
Yep.
Right? This is THC. This moves over here.
From Delta 9 to Delta 8, sister. You are awesome. Thank you for that graphic.
I don't know if that explains it, but I randomly have a shirt.
Yes, thank you, honey. It's one little just double carbon bond that moves. That changes from Delta 9 to Delta 8, but very similar effects. So, but the bottom line is that there are basically not very many folks who are doing this synthetic conversion in a healthy, clean way that doesn't leave residual solvents, and that are labeling their products appropriately so that a consumer would know exactly what was in it and whether there's a chance for them to get intoxicated. For the most part, this is bathtub gin occurring. Really difficult for the hemp industry because it creates public harm, and it creates a risk of public harm while we are still in our third year of an open rulemaking period with the FDA, who continues to refuse to make a regulatory framework for cannabidiol, which is safe and which is necessary and which consumers are demanding. And so we have this issue where these intoxicating cannabinoids, and by the way, even if you can, even for those who can make them safely, my opinion and the opinion of most folks in the responsible hemp industry are that those intoxicating cannabinoids need to be regulated into the adult use market, where they are kept from children and where there is stricter regulation, at least on a state basis, given that the feds refuse to do their job in terms of labeling and quality assurance, et cetera. So, and in terms of CBD itself hijacking, you know, we're both fiber and seed girls, right? And we have to have this conversation. So I'm not judging our conversation at all. We have to have it. But look, it's sucking up the air in the room of even our podcast right now, right? And so I find that even when I speak, I'll speak to a bunch of farmers and I'll be like, darn it, we're just going to talk about fiber and grain today. This is not a CBD. And by the way, God bless CBD. I take 120 milligrams a day, but we're not.
And it got us to where we're at.
It is that's the other thing, you know, but in any event, to finish that thought, I say, we're not talking about CBD. And the next thing you know, I'm going on 15 minutes of CBD, but it created that platform. So when I see folks that are literally anti-CBD, I'm like, where the heck is that coming from? So many people that listen, folks could be inspired by saying, this is going to make a better planet and a healthier textile for you and your family and a healthier home and a healthier diet. We can say all of those things. But people generally are far more moved when the shoulder ache that they've been dealing with for 20 years all of a sudden doesn't ache, or the terrible sleep that they have been suffering for the last 6 months all of a sudden becomes restful. Now they're listening. And that's what
strings, right? It gets somewhere it counts. And It's harder to do that on building materials.
Amen, sister. So what a platform that it has created, and thank goodness that it has been unleashed on the world, because we're talking about a public health revolution. For the love of God, side note, every mammal has an endocannabinoid system. Newsflash, did we know? And we are all walking around suffering from endocannabinoid deficiency syndrome thanks to prohibition. So anyway, all that good stuff. We love you, extracts. We love you, CBD, and also come on, fiber and grain.
Yes. Okay, so I recently read a report that the estimated need of CBD growth, is something like 3,000 acres in the United States. What's your opinion there?
I don't think that for CBD specifically, again, we've got like 140 plus cannabinoids. I don't think that is accurate. Now, where that may have come from, and it was so beautiful. We both love, I'm just going to invoke him because I'm one of his biggest, I'd say I'm his biggest fan, but the man has a lot of fans. Joe Hickey, right? From Kentucky. Yeah. And I remember that horrible year of overproduction that we're all so painfully aware of. And Joe had basically done the math, and he was like, wait a second, if every US citizen takes 20 milligrams of CBD a day, we would need this much CBD by the end of the year. And then he calculated how much biomass it would take to process and extract to get to that amount. I don't think it was 3,000. I think it was still more than 3,000 acres. But the bottom line is that, and side note, I get calls from other countries, and I don't know what this is about because it doesn't seem economically viable, but they'll be like, we want 40,000 pounds a month of a specific cannabinoid and terpene profile hemp, US grown, and then we want you to import it to our company so that we can turn it into our country so we can turn it into extract. I have no idea what that's about. It seems ridiculous, but these are the calls that I get.
I agree.
So in any event, the big lesson there is, though, please, farmers, unless you have a contract that is well drafted and vetted from a company that you have investigated and that can pay for that contract, do not grow that crop for any type, but particularly extract. That's really what happened. Is our farmers, who by and large are the most innocent portions of the supply chain, and clearly the most important. Without farmers planting the seed, we have no hemp industry at all. And they were sold a bill of goods by and large unscrupulous seed sellers, selling them magic beans and telling them that they were going to get everything from $10,000 to $100,000 an acre. And when you'd been getting $80 an acre for hay, that sounded pretty good. So that's the larger lesson here is, do not overproduce, do not pass go, do not collect $200 unless you already have a contract. It's been vetted by an attorney. It's a fair contract. By the way, Cornell Ag Extension has fantastic information about what a fair contract looks like to a farmer. In any event, that's the lesson there, my sister, whether it's 3 or 10 or 50,000, it's not a lot, dangerous to get into unless you really know what you're doing.
Yeah. So the article I'm referring to was just published, and it's quoted by Julie Lerner at Pan Exchange at a 15 milligram tincture, one person per day, or one person. Everybody gets it that we would need, less than 3,000 acres. But again, that may be just CBD growth, not additional things, right? So it's always interesting to me, these types of numbers on perspective, even if it is, like you said, 10,000 or 20,000 acres.
Yeah. I'm by the way, just a tremendous Julie Lerner and Pan Exchange. I can't tell you how many times I have interviewed her. She's absolutely wonderful.
Incredible.
And I think so many of these are also, general numbers. There are extractors out there that will say, oh my God, you're only getting that much out of that plant material. I can get this much out of that plant material. Or, wow, you get that much? I only get this much. So again,
exactly. You're right.
Working with the averages that we work with.
Right. Well, and again, so many variables, right? Which probably makes it very hard for FDA to come in and regulate because there are so many of these variables. And so
it doesn't actually, for what it's worth. No, I do want you to know that is like the major focus of my work, because that's where, I'm an expert witness and a legal consultant, and the fiber and grain industries don't necessarily have money to pay me. The extract industries have money to pay me. So that's my focus there. No, these variables, they don't have anything. The FDA, there's variables in every botanical extract, my love.
Right.
Now, granted, we're very complex, right? There's not another plant that has 140 cannabinoids and growing. I mean, for sure. But when it comes down to good manufacturing practices, we actually already have a regulatory framework. What they need to do is figure out what swim lane it's going to be, a food versus a dietary supplement versus a drug, in terms of what type and amount or potency or strength is going to be in these products, and what type of warning needs to go on the label, if any, that's new to the Code of Federal Regulations, and any additional testing. And as far as we can tell, the testing would be around intoxication. But then again, all of those, and your finished product is what your finished product is.
Yeah.
No, the FDA can do this. What they're holding their hat on, sister, is it's not safe. Liver toxicity. They are just, I don't know if I can even swear it. I'm going to say it, you guys, they are big pharma's bitch. The
Yeah.
FDA is big pharma's bitch. I'm just going to say it because there's no need to put lipstick on that pig when it's just obvious in every single way. But yeah, they are hiding behind that it isn't safe. We have proven 10 million times over with clinical trials. They have more than enough clinical trial evidence in front of them to know that a dietary supplement amount is absolutely safe for the liver. And I will just say that things like acetaminophen, we have an average of 468 deaths per year of liver toxicity from acetaminophen, over 100,000 calls per year to a poison control center, over 2,600 hospitalizations a year for acetaminophen. And several people died while they were approving acetaminophen as an over-the-counter drug. And we're getting this pushback on CBD. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox.
I love those numbers. I love hearing like the actual numbers of what are we up against and why. What is this pushback? And I think that your lipstick on the pig or lack thereof is exactly it, right?
Yeah, especially, and we've got developed countries like the UK has already said, all right, we're going to go for 70 milligrams for an adult per day for CBD. Australia, these are developed, highly sophisticated countries. What increased theirs to 120. And here we've got the United States saying, oh, dangerous stuff.
Right. Okay, so let's get into grain. Talk about grain, because I think this is along the same lines where it doesn't make sense that it's safe for us to eat, but it's not safe for our animals to eat, right? So on the feed side of the industry, the more and more I learn, and obviously I'm not in agriculture. I did not grow up in big ag. My comprehension and understanding of the value of opening up the feed market didn't hit me until a few months ago. Like I didn't, right? And then I started to really understand, and I've heard enough. I've now interviewed Morgan a couple of times and been able to dive into what she's also doing. So can you speak to me a little bit about what that regulation looks like and what do we need to do to get that over the hump so we can open up a viable grain market?
Absolutely. Now, as folks may not realize that hemp protein powder, and it is just one of the highest digestible forms of protein in the entire plant animal kingdom, on top of the perfect ratio for polyunsaturated essential fatty acids, omega-3s and 6. But how we get that protein powder is when we press that valuable hemp seed oil. What comes out the other side of the press is something called seed cake. And that seed cake is then dried and milled and sifted into protein powder. Well, there's a really big hemp seed oil market right now, but not so much for hemp protein. In fact, hemp protein powder is a little gritty. It doesn't taste so great. So there's wonderful formulators out there. I know Victory Hemp Foods with its V70 hemp protein, and a couple others that have made it into more of an isolate for formulators, so that it is less gritty and flavorless and tasteless, and it blends in with their other smoothie ingredients. I digress. The reality is, though, that because that hemp protein market is nowhere near as large as the hemp seed oil, that seed cake is piling up. Now, it is the perfect food for animals, for ag feed. In the United States, however, it is a tremendous process to get ingredients approved for animals. In fact, each ingredient separately needs to be approved for each species. Now, these applications take a little over 2 years. Some of them can be upwards of $200,000. So we're talking about seed, and there has been one application thus far since these rules have been created, which are decades in the making, but it was mad cow disease, I believe, that kind of pushed it over the edge to this insane process for animals. So there is one application that was put in so far, thank goodness from the Hemp Feed Coalition, for seed cake for the laying hen. That was 2 years in the making. The application went in February of 2021. haven't even heard where that application is in the approval process. So then there would need to be seed cake for bovine, seed cake for pig, seed cake for horse, seed cake.
Well, and it's my understanding for each type of pig or each type of cow,
and
right?
subspecies, sister. So amen. Case in point, I would have loved to have said seed cake for poultry, but I said seed cake for the laying hen, right? I mean, this is absolutely, completely untenable. It is a bizarre monopoly. Conversely, and we'll get into that supply chain. Conversely, Europe, again, extremely developed, sophisticated country. The European Union was just like no brainer. If it's approved for humans, it's approved for hemp. And they're now, the European hemp industry is simply arguing with Europe over how much CBD and other hemp extract can be in these products. They're not talking about grain. That's all done. That foundation is already laid for them. And I work with the European Union and the European Industrial Hemp Association, and they are constantly baffled with their jaw to the floor that this is where we are at in the United States for ag feed, when this would so improve our animals' health, the entire supply. But in terms of the supply chain, sister, we cannot keep letting that seed cake pile up. Literally, it piles up. You might have to build a new building to store it, and then it goes bad. When this is the most nutrient dense, food that we could be adding to and incorporating in animals' diets. Now, the last piece that I'll say on that is that even if it were any new ingredient at all, it would still have to go through this ridiculous process. But since it has cannabinoids in it, we have the extra hysteria around THC, in that they are very concerned with bioaccumulation of these cannabinoids, including CBD. Thank you, fear-mongering FDA. It used to be just Delta-9. Now it's like everything. Of the bioaccumulation of these cannabinoids in the stomachs, and then how will that affect us if we're going to eat these things afterwards? And oh my God, what about the children? So we have, this hysteria on top of it, but that needs to change. And there is a movement to change that entire regulation from the federal level. This is completely out of control. And I will also say that there are some states, such as Montana, thanks to the leadership of IND Hemp, based in Montana, that created within its state borders, said, okay, for ag feed, we'll hold off for a minute, but for companion animals, which is cats and dogs, which we presumably don't eat, and also horses, which we do not eat, Montana has said, you're good to go hemp grain here for companion animals and within the state's borders. And there are other states that want to follow suit, but I will wrap up by saying that FDA, so it's the FDA Center for Veterinary Medicine, the CVM, and then AAFCO, AAFCO, which I have to have in front of me to tell you what it is, but animals, agricultural feed, etc. It's an actual for-profit trade association. Oddly, AAFCO is not related to the government. But they, in conjunction, AAFCO and the Center for Veterinary Medicine, FDA, they're the ones that administer and handle all of these applications. And they have sent 2 fear-mongering communications to all the state departments of ag in every state saying, hey, there's a trend to sort of legalize this stuff within your state borders, hemp for ag feed. That's very dangerous. We strongly discourage that. Don't do that. Everything really needs to go through this absolutely insane process that Europe completely doesn't subscribe to. So it's bizarre on the fear-mongering, trying to chill that legislative activity that states' rights absolutely can and do to establish this crop and to create these opportunities and create this supply chain to support their farmers, their entrepreneurs, their small businesses, and to provide this incredibly healthy food to animals in their state, at least to companion animals in their state.
Especially where we've got drought problems, because their feed, right, is at risk. And so our entire supply chain starts right there. And so we have a solution. That's definitely the way that I've brought it up. I'm not surprised. I'm disappointed to hear the letters went out, like you said, fear-mongering back to our states. My understanding was that grain is a grass qualified, generally regarded as safe.
Yes, let's talk about that. By the way, hemp biocomposite coffee mug.
I love that. Where'd you get that?
Canadian Hemp Trade Alliance gift a couple years in a row for being a speaker. They are so awesome.
Heck yeah.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I was so wanting to show this off that I didn't get the question. Tell me one more time. I apologize, sister.
Grass application.
Thank you. So
certified as
for
grass.
humans, this is really interesting, is that not just, it's not really the grain, it's hulled hemp seeds, protein powder, and pressed hemp oil. Those three specific ingredients have been deemed GRAS, generally recognized as safe by FDA, thanks to expensive applications that were put in there by Fresh Hemp Foods, Manitoba Harvest, Hemp Oil Canada some years ago. Interestingly enough, they announced that FDA GRAS status on December 18th, 2020, which is when the Farm Bill, December 20, 2018, which is when the 2018 Farm Bill was signed. It was sort of like Hemp Day. And the FDA came out on that day when it was signed. That was then acting Commissioner Scott Gottlieb. And he basically had two things to say. One was, we want you to know right off the bat here that we consider it to be a violation of federal law to market CBD and hemp extracts as dietary supplements and food, despite what just happened with this bill. But we also want you to know that today we deemed hulled hemp seeds, hemp protein powder, and pressed hemp oil as GRAS, generally recognized as safe. So that all happened on that same day, the day that the Farm Bill was signed. But for humans, that's the thing. And which is exactly why the Europe is like, okay, so for humans, so then definitely for animals too. And in the United States, we're like, oh no, not definitely.
It's so weird. It's so bizarre. But these are our loopholes that we've got to get through, right?
Yes. This is the country that we live in. We're just going to work with it and engage in the process. By the way, that's my favorite thing about all things cannabis, particularly hemp, is this is empowering people. People need, why are we living if not for a purpose? This really gives people an opportunity to belong, live a purpose-driven life and to engage in the process. And once people start to engage in the process through the hemp movement or other forms of cannabis, then they start to realize they can engage in the process in every area of their life and all of the different revolutions and movements that are taking place to make our country a better place, the world a better place, and to meet the needs of every citizen of every kind and type and status. So we can take care of each other. This is really teaching us to engage in the process.
It's been interesting to me as I got into this, and I'm sure some of you have heard this before because I say it quite a bit, but when I first got into this industry, I did not have connection to supply chain for textiles or the $5 t-shirt that you buy or the way things were sourced. And hemp has opened those avenues. And really, I've had aha moment after aha moment as to where hemp plays a significant role in providing opportunity and protection and food and shelter and all of these things, right? Let alone business and innovation. And, the innovation part has been extremely exciting as we've watched these. We're just starting. And I say all the time, if we can hurry up and get more processing in place, then our kids can get their hands on this product and really start to change the world with it.
Yes.
So speaking of products and use products, can you talk to me about what you see as big opportunity for fiber market and what does that timeline look like as far as development of the market?
Yeah, indeed. So fiber, I'm just going to throw out the first list that comes to me, right? Paper, textiles, building materials, biocomposites, bioresins, fuel, energy, batteries, pellets, nanotechnology, biomedical applications. Somebody stop me. OMG. Longest, strongest fiber in the world, surface area and strength second only to carbon nanotubes and graphite whiskers, which are so expensive as man-made materials that it's basically cost prohibitive to do R&D, research and development on them, much less create products that mere mortals like you and I can buy off department store and grocery store shelves. So the big opportunities, the major markets there, besides everything that I just said, but I think in terms of initial infrastructure here, we're talking building materials, even animal bedding is just huge. Building materials and energy, and did I mention textiles, paper, biocomposites? I mean, all of those. Now, timelines and infrastructure and complexity and all of that. When we talk about supercapacitors, which is something that just completely excites me when I realize hempcrete, of course, of the thousands of products, is, those who know me know that is my number one favorite. I am all about hemp insulation, but with a layer of carbonized hemp fiber in your hempcrete wall, now your house is its own battery. It's its own energy storage unit. Now, so that I think research and development and moving into those products while they already exist in prototype form. I mean, I sat around with Carl Martel in Calgary, Canada in 2018, where he was sort of like walking around with a little hempcrete brick with some, I think, carbonized hemp fiber in it and a wire sticking out of it. And we were all charging our cell phones and tablets with what he was holding in his hand. But in order to make it more mainstream, I think that's a little farther out. I want to say, and it's hard for me to make these predictions because there's so much brilliance in the world.
We haven't even started. We have how many, if there's said 50,000, I feel like that's a stretch, but if there's said, say 20,000 products, we have a tiny handful of those, right? That will only begin to develop this huge web of more opportunity. And so I'm with you. I think that we've got this current opportunity, and then where I see major opportunity is in energy, our energy sector.
You hit it on the head. I mean, this really, and we're talking energy from methane. This is just incredibly methane producing, not that, everyone wants to hear me say that, but renewable natural gas. And then of course, pellets. That herd, has the same BTUs as wood, only it burns much cleaner. I mean, no brainer. And by the way, keep the trees right where they are and grow this fast growing crop 70 to 120 days. I mean, while creating the stability for the farmer. So pellets, renewable natural gas, and then the supercapacitors. As I say, that has nothing to do with either the pellets or the renewable natural gas. We're just talking about the fiber itself, carbonized hemp fiber itself. But, that's where it's huge. I think we're going to see major developments in the next 5 to 10 years. I think they're going to be exponential. I think if we look back at this conversation in 10 years, I'm pretty sure we're going to be like, we couldn't even have imagined that we were going to be here in 10 years.
That's what's so exciting, right? It really is, what can you dream? Because understanding what hemp is and where it compares to the materials we have today or have access and supply chain set up for today, right? It far surpasses. And so it's exciting to know, what is to come. And that's why I ask, is like knowing big picture. For example, I have a guest that has come to our events a couple of times who has created skin.
Created what?
Skin.
Yeah, the biomedical application. Exactly, my sister. Exactly.
And that's, those are in our medical side. And it's funny too, I want to talk about this maybe just a little bit, is this divide in the cannabis or medical and recreational from the hemp, right? And realizing that hemp has medical applications. And so when we're talking about cannabis or hemp, right, to be able to see that it isn't only building materials or these industrial applications, it is also this medical aspect that touches right next to, the CBD or the ingestibles or,
And two things there. One is, I think it's important for us to know that there are actually very few genetic differences between a low THC form of cannabis and a higher THC form of cannabis, particularly around that stalk. Now, the stalk of and just to distinguish the two plants, I'll say of a marijuana plant, is while if you took a cross section of that and a cross section of a hemp stalk, you'd see the hemp stalk is actually a lot more hollow. But that stalk of that other form of cannabis plant has many uses, including that skin that you're talking about. Now, the divide in the industries really has to do with the cannabinoids right now. And that conversation that we had a few minutes ago on hemp all of a sudden starting to encroach when it was never intended for it to encroach on the intoxicating market, which really belongs to adult use and medical. Not that we're getting intoxicated for medical, it's just that a side effect of your medical need may be that you become intoxicated, therefore
or that there's a chance. Whether
Yes.
you do or not, if there's a chance a child can get a hold of it, that's a black eye on our industry. And in my opinion, that's what Big Pharma and the FDA are waiting for. I shouldn't say waiting. They're not, but
it's already
it
happened.
only
They
takes-
already have all of
Exactly.
their FDA has put up a huge fear mongering on Delta 8, about 6 months ago, gigantic fear
Right.
mongering, and not unfounded, but they always fear monger. And so I never like when they fear monger. They fear monger about CBD. They said, and they get into your sexuality, the United States. And that's how they sort of legalized marijuana in 1937 and hemp, which was really the reason why they illegalized it in so many ways. They used sexuality at the time in that whole hysterical campaign. And so does the FDA. They say, oh, breast milk. Oh, don't let the CBD get into your breast milk. Our breast milk is full of endocannabinoids, which are cannabinoids we create in our body, versus phytocannabinoids, which are cannabinoids that come from the cannabis plant. But the minute you're done breastfeeding, if you were lucky enough to be breastfed, then you go right back into endocannabinoid deficiency syndrome. And you were deficient anyway because your mother wasn't actually producing all the endocannabinoids that she ought to have, because she'd been deprived of the cannabinoids going into her body from external sources. But in any event, it just boils down to the fact that we do not want to get people intoxicated with hemp, and marijuana is saying, listen, what are you doing, guys? We have the most expensive and onerous regulatory framework of any form of cannabis, and now you're encroaching on our sales by selling these intoxicating things. So that's where that divide is really coming from in terms of the biomedical applications, such as that skin that you're discussing. I think in the end we're going to find, and not in the end, as things move forward, I believe, and at the international level, this is well being talked about, especially at ASTM, we will regulate cannabis no matter what, based on its end use. We will have industrial cannabis, meaning, nope, this is not going to come into any ingestion at all. We will have nutritional cannabis. We're going to be consuming that.
Protein,
We'll have
yeah.
medical cannabis. That's a whole nother structure, but it's all cannabis, not this hemp versus
no different than the pepper. Melissa does a great job and always describes it as like marijuana or high THC is like a jalapeno pepper. Hemp, right, is like bell peppers. There's red pepper, yellow pepper, green pepper. And yeah, but they're all still hemp. They're all still produced. And so you've got, like you said, nutritional or grain, and then your fiber.
That's what we want to see. Why are we bothering with all of this testing when we're making paper? For God's sake, you don't need to be testing my plants for paper.
It wasn't very long ago that Utah was requiring one of our members to test the THC level of a roofing tile.
Yes, exactly. Now, I will say one quick little historical story that is funny, and I'll make it super short here, is when I had my hemp store, Heaven on Earth in Woodstock, in 1995. Now, bear in mind that the Woodstock police were always coming into my store and asking to buy weed undercover. Like, oh, gee, I'm selling hemp in 1995, for God's sake, commencing in 94. So they were always very frustrated by that. Well, in any event, one day I get a letter in the mail from the U.S. Secret Service, and it's a cease and desist. And I may not get to this whole story in time, but if you Google Joy Beckerman, I grew hemp, oh my God, the Associated Press has a great and lots of articles on that from 1995. Anyway, so I get this cease and desist letter that tells me I'm mutilating U.S. currency for stamping I grew hemp on the $1 bills that are coming in and out of my store, coming out of George Washington's mouth, a little thought bubble, I grew hemp. So in any event, I get all excited over this. of this cease and desist. And we only had 2 organizations at the time. We had Normal, thank you, Normal, and we had High Times Magazine. Well, I'm in New York. I was already hanging out with the High Times folks. So I called it, and at that point, the editor was Steve Yeager. And I was like, Steve, oh my God, I just got this letter. What do we do? How can we make this into a thing? And he ends up, I don't know how. I mean, High Times did its own article as well, but a gentleman named Rick Cusick, who was on the Normal board of directors, who went on to be the publisher and editor of High Times in later years. But at the time, he wasn't involved in High Times, but he knew those guys. He was working for like a weekly rag in New Jersey called The Aquarian, a musical weekly. And he ended up, he's an investigative journalist. And he ends up calling. I faxed this letter to him, and this letter, everything was faxed back then, you guys. And attached to the letter was a picture of my bill that someone had faxed to the U.S. Secret Service. Well, this investigative journalist, Rick, discovers that fax number was the Woodstock police, and that it was the Woodstock police who had faxed that picture of my bill to the U.S. Secret Service. So he calls the Woodstock police, and he's, oh, I can't believe that woman who thinks that she can just have this hemp store in your town, and now she's stamping bills. What's up with that? And they were like, well, we went in there to buy marijuana from her several times, and when we couldn't buy marijuana from her, we took her hemp seeds, her sterilized hemp seeds, because I was selling them for food. And we sent them to the lab in Albany to be tested for THC. And when those came back negative, we went into her store and we got her hemp twine. And we sent that hemp twine to Albany, and we had that tested for THC. And when that came back negative and we just couldn't get her for anything, we thought, we're going to get her for this. We're going to get her for mutilating U.S. currency. So he writes this piece called Theater in a Crowded Fire, all about this. And the Associated Press picks up the story, and it goes coast to coast in all the main newspapers. Her hemp dollars draw U.S. haulers. Well, what happens, short end of the story is, what happens is, now that all these reporters are onto this story, they start bombing and flooding this, what ends up being actually a small U.S. Secret Service office in Albany that has really important work to do with phone calls about this woman and her I Grow Hemp stamp. And they can't take it anymore. So the U.S. Secret Service calls me and they say, listen, we had to act on this because the Woodstock police sent us this thing. It's our job to act on it. But the reality is that it's not technically mutilating U.S. currency under the statute unless it's your intention to render the currency out of circulation. Clearly, it is your intention to keep that currency in circulation because you want to spread your message. So you're not actually mutilating U.S. currency, and you can continue to do what you're doing. But will you do us a favor? What's that? You're stamping in dark purple ink. If you would stamp in red ink, that would be better because the purple ink messes with the money counting machines at the bank. So if you would stamp in red ink, that would be better. Oh, thank you so much for that piece of information. I shall take it under consideration.
I can't believe that.
Moral of the story, stamp away, people, and use the darkest ink you can come up with.
Oh, how funny.
I don't even know how we got started on that, but thank you for letting me tell it.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Okay, so we're wrapping up and we're right at an hour. And so I want to sum this up, but I would love to have you back. I've enjoyed your conversation. It's been fun. I always enjoy listening to you.
Thank you.
So to sum up real quick, I want to remind everybody, please, and say thank you to everybody that listens. Say thank you to our members also for supporting us and continuing to help us grow. I see Nathan's on, Rion's on, Ray. I've got a LinkedIn user here, and of course, sometimes it doesn't show up. I don't know if this is Adam or not, but last week it was. Christian Gray, I saw you on quite a bit. Josh, Edgar, Robert. Thank you again very much, John, for joining in. But Joy, to sum up real quick, want to give a shout out to a couple of companies or organizations that are really doing great things in the industry, and then we'll say goodbye to everybody.
Thank you so much for that opportunity and so much for having me, Mandy.
Yeah.
The U.S. Hemp Roundtable is our nation's foremost 501c4 advocacy organization. It's not a trade association. They do just tremendous work. I really cannot support them enough. That's hempsupporter.com. I am the president for the Center of the Study of Cannabis and Social Policy, which is a 501c3 charitable educational organization that I love so much. The U.S. Hemp Building Association focused entirely on building materials. And as we said, building materials, my number one. They're just doing tremendous work and are pushing through for residential codes, international residential code for hemp, and have been making great progress there. Friends of Hemp, which it has been acquired by the Global Hemp Association, Mandy, just tremendous work, a 501c3 organization that has been acquired by Global Hemp, which of course is a 501c6 trade association, just doing such really important work. And the Hemp Feed Coalition. We've got to support the Hemp Feed Coalition to get this insanity taken care of with the supply chain and ag feed. And those are just a few of the so many organizations that are doing great things. There are wonderful organizations at the state level too.
Absolutely. I want to give a real quick shout out to our sponsors for our seed trials. So IND Hemp, Prairie Brand Ag, Almco, AgriLead, South Bend Industrial Hemp, Formation Ag, and Westtown Bank.
Some of my favorites on that list.
Yes, have all come together, and some great names, right? And then we've got a few more that are coming in. So anybody else that's interested in getting behind our seed trials, data will be available to our sponsors at the end of this year and then to the public in April or May. And so really gives you an opportunity to get ahead of some of that data as we create reports and ahead of the season. So with that being said, Joy, I sure appreciate everything you're doing, and I'm excited to continue this conversation. Thank you very much for everybody else that's listening. I loved having this talk today. It was a good way to start my day. And we had quite a few listeners on, so shout out. Thank you very, very much. Anyways, Joy, we'll talk later. I'm going to put on a quick little goodbye commercial, and we'll be in touch soon.
Thank you, Mandy, and thank you, Global Hemp Association.
Absolutely. Thank you.